But Travis, if you tell them the truth, people are going to get mad. Oh no, I can't have people being mad at me. No one's ever been mad at me before. What should I do? Oh wait, I'm getting a call from Bibi. Boop. Yes, Mr. Netanyahu. What should I do? Oh, yes. Okay, great. I understand. I will continue the puppeteering. I will continue controlling the masses by these puppet strings. The global cabal will always win out. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Netanyahu. Beep. Wow, that was weird. Ladies and gentlemen, we are live again. I don't know what that was. We got cross connection with some radio signal from some other planet. It should be really effing obvious to people who value academic debate standards and high resolution epistemology who won this debate. This should be more, this is not a difficult test to figure out who won this debate. And a very easy example to teach from. I'm curious, there's 26 of you in the room right now. Please write in the comment section who you think won the debate and why you think they won. The why part is what has been baffling about what I've been seeing in people's reactions to this debate. People will say, this person dog walked this person. And then they give no reason as to why. Now, there's a few people out there who are giving their reasons. Some people will take one 1-minute chunk from their debate and say, well, this summarizes the whole debate. This is the part that matters. And that's why this person got destroyed. I think the epistemically responsible thing to do is to look at the claims, look at the posturing, look at the debate prowess from an academic perspective, make some ethical judgments, some things you didn't like, some things you liked, and then bring that information together and deliver it, articulate it in a way that draws clear lines to how you score this debate. Now, this is interesting because I keep seeing the people who the people who came out really quick and said, Candace owned him. And some of those people are people who I really like and adore and think they're generally good thinkers. And then some people, me being one of them, started releasing the data. And then I see some people who had that emotional knee-jerk reaction pour out of themselves onto social media and say things like, this was a dominating performance by Candace Owens. Now they're saying things like, we all lost. Or everybody lost. There was no winner. We can still assess the claims, the epistemic reliability, the epistemic fortitude and soundness of this debate. We can still assess through our own ethical lenses of who was better where. I can see people were talking about how the Dave Farina propaganda video about Israel, Palestine, and destiny that was recently dropped. People were talking about how that Broke people's brains? I don't know what broke people's brains more. Dave's video or this debate? It's wild. It is wild. I'm seeing the wildest takes. I did not expect to see so many atheists, pro-science, science is a way of knowing people, empiricists. And we'll be going through some of these examples when I go through X a little bit later, once we go through this report. So some people are saying, let's see. Lenny Foster says, Candace, Andrew did not know enough of the underlying facts to refute her facts. Andrew is also a total chud. Now, first of all, we're going to demonstrate how that is wrong based on the data, what you just said, Lenny Foster. But I am not here as someone that is going to speak kindly about Mr. Andrew Wilson and the way he carries himself. He's not a good man. Not a good man. Does that mean, and why is he not a good man, you might ask? Well, I'm a moral well-beingist. I measure good, bad, right, and wrong in the world based on well-being outcomes. Well-being meaning physical, mental, and social health. I think he has a bullyish way of treating people, especially those who he sees as political opponents. And bullies just generally score low, and hateful people. He claims himself that he hates the left. He hates the left. And this kind of stuff, he also recognizes that is counter to his, his attachment to his proclaimed Christian faith. But if we do a little internal critique there, Jesus left some clear instructions that you're supposed to be trying to walk by his example. Based on some things I've studied about Andrew Wilson, I learned a lot about him this week. I did a 4-hour deep dive by way of a deep Pangburn analysis into his work, his epistemic high points generally, and his general failures. He's not a good man when I look at the ethical stuff. He can become a better man if he starts living true to his own values, if he starts rationalizing his behaviors to his own professed values. But he's not there. He needs to change his behavior. Stop saying things like, all women are retarded, within the context of the kind of debate he was just engaged in, sitting across from a pregnant woman who's there to debate him about an assassination trial. Knowing that there are surely many women viewing and watching that debate. I'm not saying in certain contexts that kind of shock humor can't be funny. Under certain contexts, like a Louis C.K. absurdist context. I'm not someone who's going to give an absolutely crap on any kind of humor. But that was just awkward. And some might say retarded to behave in that way, given the context. That being said, that doesn't mean he didn't win this debate, which the data shows he clearly, unequivocally did. Not in every single category. Not in every single category. There is one category that we will get to where Candace won. I think she maintained a better ethical posture with regards to one category. But come on. This is, if you apply basic epistemic standards that rely on empiricism, that value evidence, Bayesian reasoning, etc., you can only come to one honest conclusion. From an epistemic perspective, from a academic debate perspective, by those standards, Andrew Wilson dominated the debate. That partly is because Candace Owens is on such terrible grounding, conspiratorial line drawing to things, to lines that never connect causally to her overwhelming patsy conspiracy claim. There's nothing there. There isn't nothing that connects it. As much as you stack those anomalies, and we'll get into the anomaly stacking and why it's a bad epistemic posture, but just because you can stack up all of these anomalies, find all of these, pet issues that could lead to reasonable hypotheses to investigate. But no, these are being adopted as beliefs and like burden of proof switching, thinking that, well, I'm going to hold these positions unless someone proves them wrong. That's logically fallacious. That's shifting the burden. So there are so many obvious epistemic errors that a philosophy 101 student could have went in to Candace Owens' studio and done as well of a job as Andrew. Actually, the philosophy 101 student who has a decent grasp on logic could have done better, because Andrew Wilson put his foot in his mouth on a few occasions, ethically. One moment where he seemed to be lying or deceiving with regards to how much he knew about the 7 counts, the 7 actual counts that were laid against Mr. Robinson. That doesn't mean him saying murder was incorrect, by the way. Even in the way legal officials and lawyers in Utah talk about these kinds of trials, this is a murder trial. It is a murder trial. And he is being charged with murder. It's a particular kind of murder. Yes. Yes. But it is still murder. We got some super chats in here. Thank you so much for the super chats. Let's go to the first one. Someone says, Andrew Wilson, gunsmith and warfighter and Turning Point USA debate coach. So thank you so much, Mr. Duck, Mr. Nate, for the $20 super chat. I really appreciate that. I don't know about how good of a gunsmith he is or warfighter, but the debate coach thing, there's good evidence to support that's true, that Turning Point USA hired him as a debate coach. That's true. That is true. What hasn't been demonstrated, and again, thank you so much for the super chat. I will respond to all super chats, by the way. What hasn't been demonstrated is that the $300,000 that apparently was received and pocketed by Candace Owens, which I think should go to Charlie Kirk's kids, or she can even put it in a trust if she doesn't want Erica Kirk to touch it, or go to some other cause that you think your friend Charlie Kirk would have really wanted to see that money go to that thing. I mean, for $300,000, you can build 4 churches in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. So we'll see what she does with the money. Maybe we'll follow that story. But it hasn't been demonstrated that that money came from Turning Point USA. You shouldn't be believing that. There is no publicly available demonstration that is the case. If you use simple, conspiratorial line drawing correlations without any causal link to that claim that Turning Point USA paid for this, if you do that, then yeah, you can say, I have a conspiracy theory. You shouldn't believe it. But you can further investigate that hypothesis and see if there's anything to it. But so far, based on my study of the evidence, nothing available. Let me know who you think won this debate and why. We're going to go through this most recent report that I've generated, which is called the Expert Academic Debate Standards Report. We have another super chat by Mr. Nate. Bouncing between debate panels. Good to see you, Pangburn peeps. Thank you so much for the super chat. That's $25 from the same man. Thank you, Nate. Thank you. Thank you. So some people have been saying Candace. Someone said they thought Candace won. Jamie says Candace for sure. All Andrew does is insult people. That's not true based on the evidence of this debate. That's an overgeneralization. And you said Candace for sure without giving your reason as to why, Jamie. The why is what matters here. Someone says, I think most people saw this as an early proxy for the court case, so it was enough for Andrew to have not made his case, while Candace introduced enough reasonable doubt. Well, enough reasonable doubt for what? Also, tell me who you think won. Someone says Candace is interesting until you become familiar with basic common logical fallacies. There are a lot of logical issues in the way she thinks. Andrew wasn't perfect either. Remember, I will respond to any super chats. You guys are hilarious. Someone said, Andrew said his doctor told him if he stopped smoking, he would die. That's interesting. I might need to have a chat with that doctor. So, someone says, Candace won because Andrew didn't pin her down good enough. That doesn't sound very empirical. Okay, let's look at the data. I can't wait. So, just so everyone's clear, you can go to our website. I'm actually going to do this live here so you guys can see. We don't want to go tickets. You want to go to the Pangburn website, pang-burn.com/analysis. Oh, no, you guys can't see this. That's okay. But you go to pang-burn.com/analysis, and you can follow along. You can download this. Someone who calls himself Factual Patrick says, Candace won, but mostly because the current physical evidence is pretty weak. So I really wonder why Andrew did this in the first place. But why do you think? You think Candace won mostly because the current physical evidence is weak? Why would that mean she won the debate? Why would that mean she won the debate, Mr. Factual? Okay, so let's go through this. Anyways, there's the website, pang-burn.com/analysis. You can download all of the documents relating to these two events. There's one document called Andrew Wilson versus Candace Owens Analysis. That is the first report we've released that has the full-on analysis. But today, we are going to look at Andrew Wilson versus Candace Owens debate performance. Debate performance. Okay? And we are going to see what the empirical data actually shows, as opposed to just being like, yeah, I got this vibe that Candace Owens was onto something. So I'm going with her as the winner. We need to stop thinking like this. This is low resolution. If we were to compare it to one's nutritional diet, saying things like that is not even equivalent to having a nice home-cooked meal at McDonald's. No. We're in the back of McDonald's picking through the dumpster and eating that. Partially moldy, partially soggy. I wonder what the liquid was. So we need to transcend that. We need to start thinking in a higher resolution way epistemically. If you care about the facts, if you care about correspondence criteria of truth, which directly relates to objective truth, what the objects in reality are actually doing. The objects in this case would be things like the gun in this case, Tyler Robinson himself, the debaters themselves. What is objectively the case? If you care about that, then we need to move towards a higher resolution relationship with the evidence and with what is actually going on in reality. And you do that by holding yourself to higher epistemic standards. Try to be an empiricist. And we're going to go through the thinking failures that were so commonly on display in this conversation. What up, everyone? Make sure you smash that like button. It just takes 1 second. It attracts more people to this fact-finding mission. All right. Penguin analysis. Andrew Wilson. Remember, I will respond to every single itty-bitty super chat. Thank you for being with here. I really do. Thank you for being with me here today. I really do love you all. So Andrew Wilson versus Candace Owens, the Charlie Kirk debate. Expert academic debate standards report. Content only evaluation under argumentation theory, burden of proof discipline, evidence quality, inferential strength, rebuttal, epistemic calibration, technical precision, and last but not least, dialectical conduct. Ooh. So, this was prepared for Penguin analysis today. The source evidence cutoff was yesterday, August 14th. First, in this first table, we have measure. Then we have the two speakers, Andrew Wilson and Candace Owens. Academic debate composite. Andrew Wilson scoring a 7.9 out of 10. It's not awful. Where I overall score for by academic debate standards, once you start falling below a 7, that's when you aren't reaching what I would consider the baseline competency level. So Andrew was slightly above the baseline competency level by my standards for this debate. Candace Owens is on life support. Almost an actual F, almost an actual failing grade. Evidentiary merits. Andrew Wilson, clear advantage from an evidentiary merits perspective. Candace Owens did not meet affirmative hidden action burden. Affirmative hidden action burden. Another way of thinking about that, with all of these conspiracy theories she has, all of these things that she thinks could connect or she believes does connect, she hasn't drawn that causal line, that causal bridge from those things to the greater theory, the patsy theory, the setup theory, the FBI, Israel, the French, all that stuff. Strongest area. Andrew Wilson, burden / causal bridge discipline. Candace Owens, issue generation / cross-examination. So her strongest posture for this debate, I think this is correct. Yes, cross-examination. She's very talented at that. Biggest weaknesses, Andrew's personal rhetoric / motive behavior overreach. There was that cell phone moment where Andrew himself started spinning his own little conspiracy theory about Candace Owens receiving texts and prompts trying to help her for the debate. And then personal rhetoric. We're going to get into the conduct area of the scoring, which you might be surprised who won from a sheer debate conduct perspective. Candace Owens, biggest weakness, insufficient warrants plus certainty inflation. Some of the things that come to mind. I believe there is a 0% chance. We're not talking like low plausibility. She said 0% chance. 0. Get that? Less than 1, 0% chance that Robinson murdered Charlie Kirk. Core academic finding. On a content-only, evidence-centered academic debate standard, just want to make sure this is coming through nice and clear for you guys. Yes, it is. Very good. You guys good there? Okay, great. Andrew Wilson wins clearly. One more time. On a content-only, evidence-centered academic debate standard, Andrew Wilson wins clearly. The decisive margin comes from better burden management, stronger cumulative use of public evidence, more disciplined causal bridge demands, and greater uncertainty calibration. Candace Owens, by the way, I need to make this very clear. This is not an endorsement of Andrew Wilson, the man. This is not an endorsement of Andrew Wilson, the man. I'm going to say that multiple times throughout this thing. I have problems with Andrew Wilson, the man. And when he's feeling man enough, him and I can sit down and talk about those things. Candace Owens raised several legitimate anomalies and technical questions, but the source record shows repeated movement from possibility to anomaly to affirmative hidden actor conclusions without sufficient warrant. Wilson's victory is materially reduced, but not reversed, of course, by severe rhetorical misconduct and several unsupported motive/behavioral claims. One more time, Wilson's victory is materially reduced, but not reversed by severe rhetorical misconduct and several unsupported motive/behavioral claims. Scope safeguard. This is not a fresh guilt determination, a psychological diagnosis, or a speaker-wide truth rate study. It is a second-order academic debate analysis of the perfected forensic source report supplied by the user. That's me. This is referring to the full analysis report we released yesterday. It just names the source file there. Okay. Let's get into the executive academic assessment. Bottom line, under standards used in informal logic, argumentation theory, and critical discussion, Wilson performed substantially better on the central disputed proposition, whether the public record better supports Robinson as the shooter than a specific patsy frame-up foreign involvement mechanism. The forensic source report already found a Wilson advantage on the narrow evidentiary merits. This academic debate layer explains why that advantage exists in argumentative terms. You're going to see things like source report. That's just referring to the page number in the source report that we're using to inform this particular report. And you're also going to eventually see other source numbers in brackets. Why Wilson leads. His strongest debate behavior was not that every claim was correct. It was that his main case usually had an identifiable claim, evidence, warrant structure. Alleged admissions, surveillance, firearms/physical evidence, and DNA were treated cumulatively. He repeatedly asked Owens to connect anomalies to a specific alternative mechanism, and he sometimes explicitly conceded uncertainty instead of inventing an answer. Why Owens trails? Her strongest contribution was investigative. She surfaced real evidentiary limitations and anomalies inclusive specific rifle ballistics, mixed DNA, limits on DNA timing, scene paving, surveillance gaps, backpack provenance, discovery/device questions, and body cam failure. But the source report repeatedly finds that these points were converted into positive support for a specific patsy/foreign/explosive theory without a demonstrated causal bridge. That's a problem. We need that causal bridge. Anyone can build up conspiracy theories based on correlations that they think are correlated. But if we don't have that causal bridge, that causal line drawn to the theory, then there is no good reason to believe that these things are actually attached to that proposed theory. This is basic philosophy 101, logical, educational stuff. By the way, for those of you who are on X, I would really appreciate it if you shared this post, because this post is announcing that we are doing this very thing right now. Important qualification. Academic debate quality is not identical to factual accuracy. A speaker can make a factually true observation, yet argue badly from it. A speaker can also make a weak or unsupported side claim while maintaining the stronger overall case. The rubric therefore scores burden, discharge, relevance, sufficiency, warrant quality, rebuttal, and calibration rather than simply counting verdict labels. Let's look at figure 1. What is figure 1 telling us? Oh, look at these giant bars. They look terrifying. Figure 1 says evidence-centered academic debate composite. On the left side, we got Candace Owens in orange, Andrew Wilson in blue. Candace Owens is scoring a 5 out of a possible 10. Andrew Wilson a 7.9 out of a possible 10. On the bottom, we have weighted academic debate score, 0 to 10. Figure 1, weighted content only academic debate composite. This is an analyst-coded rubric, not an objective tournament statistic. So where's all this coming from? We're going to get into this here. Number 1, method. What, quote, expert academic debate standards means here? The report synthesizes 4 established families of argument evaluation norms. Tolman's model emphasizes the relationship among claim, data, warrant, backing, qualifier, and rebuttal. Informal logic traditions evaluate whether premises are acceptable, relevant, and sufficient, bracket ARS, end bracket. Pragma dialectics treats argumentation as a critical discussion in which parties should allow challenges, meet burdens of proof, address relevant objections, and avoid discussion blocking moves. Burden of proof scholarship further emphasizes that the party advancing a proposition bears a context-sensitive obligation to support it to the required standard. Acceptability. Are the premises or source claims sufficiently credible to be used? Relevance. Does the offered evidence actually bear on the conclusion being defended? Sufficiency. Is the total support strong enough for the asserted degree of confidence? Warrant quality. Is the Inferential bridge from evidence to conclusion, explicit and defensible. Burden management. Does the speaker support their own positive claim rather than merely finding gaps in the opponent's case? Dialectical responsiveness. Does the speaker answer objections, counter evidence, and requests for clarification? Epistemic calibration. Does confidence match the evidence with uncertainty and legal stage kept explicit? Critical discussion conduct. Do rhetoric and personal attacks remain subordinate to the merits? Why this rubric is content only. The supplied source report is exceptionally rich on evidence, logic, factual accuracy, legal posture, and rhetoric, but it is not a tournament ballot with reliable measures of speech timing, vocal delivery, audience adaptation, and formal constrictive/rebuttal allocations. Those presentation dimensions are therefore excluded rather than guessed. What up, everyone? Make sure you take a second to smash that like button. Do it, do it, do it. Scoring rubric and anchors. Let's look at the scoring rubric and anchors. So we have dimension, weight, Wilson, and Owens. So on the dimension of burden of proof and thesis management, this is given 15% weight in the scoring. Andrew Wilson is sitting at an 8.5 out of 10. Owens is sitting at a 4.5 out of 10. We will get into why these scores are the way they are. Evidence quality and source provenance. This is worth 20% of the overall scoring. 8 out of 10 for Wilson, 5 out of 10 for Owens. Inferential strength/warrant. This is worth 20% of the scoring. 8 for Wilson, 4 out of 10, a failing grade for Owens. Rebuttal and responsiveness. This is worth 15% of the score. An 8 out of 10 for Wilson and a 6.5, better score than previous scores for Owens. Epistemic calibration. This is worth 10% of the score. 8.5 for Wilson, 4 out of 10 for Owens. Counter evidence, correction, and falsifiability. 10% weight given. 8 out of 10 for Wilson, 6.5 out of 10 for Owens. Legal/forensic conceptual precision. 5% of the total weight. 7.5 out of 10 for Wilson, 4.5 out of 10 for Owens. Dialectical conduct and relevance, worth 5% of the overall score. 4 out of 10 for Wilson, a failing grade. That sticks out like a sore thumb for Andrew Wilson. Why is it so low, this score of dialectical conduct and relevance? A 4 out of 10 for Wilson and a 5.5 out of 10 for Owens. So this is the one category, dialectical conduct and relevance, where Owens has beaten, based on the data, has beaten Andrew Wilson. But quite a dominating victory for Andrew Wilson in the other dimensions. So here are those dimensions represented on this figure 2 graph, academic debate performance by dimension. Let's look at some information here. Burden of proof and thesis management. Andrew Wilson gets an 8.5 out of 10, which is recorded that way right here at the top. Burden of proof and thesis management. Let's look at the information for these scores. Wilson generally defended a narrower proposition. The available public record materially implicates Robinson, and the competing affirmative patsy slash foreign action theory lacks a verified causal bridge. That thesis was easier to define, and the source report shows him repeatedly asking for the bridge from mixed DNA, anomalies, or donor conflict to an actual frame-up mechanism. Strength: Wilson distinguished his personal use of, quote, overwhelming from the legal standard and acknowledged that guilt had not yet been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Another strength: he challenged the proposition that procedural admissibility under Rule 1102 makes Owens's inferences evidentially equivalent to the state's cumulative case. Weakness: at points, he spoke as if prosecution evidence were simply settled fact rather than allegations slash exhibits at a pending stage. Weakness: his, quote, no evidence formulations were sometimes too absolute where there were at least anonymous source allegations or leads. Candace Owens, 4.5 out of 10 with regards to burden of proof and thesis management. Owens successfully imposed a burden on Wilson to answer anomalies, but she did not consistently discharge the burden created by her own affirmative claims. The central academic problem is burden substitution. Showing that the prosecution case contains gaps is not equivalent to showing that a specific frame-up or an operation or explosive mechanism is supported. Strength: she clearly identified the prosecution theory as contestable and asked what the public record could not establish. Strength: she repeatedly demanded stronger evidence than a single blurry image or a simplistic, quote, DNA equals shooter inference. Weakness: quote, I think France and Israel are involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination, was advanced, quote, with full confidence, while the source record found no publicly verified operational bridge. Weakness: the exploding microphone theory was called, quote, viable without disclosed explosive residue, device pathology, or authenticated fragment analysis. Weakness: multiple possibilities, alternate account access, planted evidence, foreign phones, explosive mechanisms were treated as weighted for a preferred alternative before actor-action access coordination evidence was established. So what's the academic debate principle here? A successful negative critique can defeat an opponent's confidence without proving the critic's preferred alternative. Once a debater asserts an affirmative hidden action theory, the burden shifts. Anomalies must be connected to a mechanism, not merely accumulated. Argument quality, acceptability, relevance, and sufficiency. The ARS lens is particularly useful because many debate claims were not deductive. The relevant question is whether the premises were credible enough, actually relevant to the conclusion, and jointly sufficient for the confidence expressed. So we have in the table evidence/premise type, then academic status, then application in this debate. Let's look at public prosecution evidence. Generally acceptable as provisional evidence when attributed to the state/hearing record. Wilson used surveillance, rifle, DNA, and alleged admissions cumulatively, strongest when he preserved legal stage caveats. Mixed DNA/degradation. Relevant to limits on what DNA proves, Owens was right to resist, quote, DNA equals shooter, but degradation did not establish a recency ordering or alternate user. Ballistics limitation. Relevant and important. Owens correctly highlighted the inconclusive specific rifle comparison. The source report rejected her stronger definitive exclusion claim. Scene anomalies. Relevant to investigative confidence and documentation quality. Paving, body cam failure, backpack questions, and surveillance gaps can justify scrutiny, but are insufficient by themselves to identify a hidden actor. Anonymous/private sources. Potentially acceptable as leads, lower weight. Owens' own extraordinary French/Israeli claims. That was the application in this debate. Let me add a little information to this last one. Anonymous/private sources, potentially acceptable as leads, lower weight without corroboration. Owens's extraordinary French/Israeli claims remained undersupported. Wilson's private Kirk security texts received the same provenance caution. Behavior/motive claims. Generally weak unless independently supported. Wilson's parent silence and profit motive arguments were unsupported. Owens's broad influencer/Turning Point USA motive claims were likewise unsupported. Overall ARS result. Wilson's primary cumulative case had greater sufficiency because multiple evidence streams converged on the same proposition, even though individual streams had limits. Owens, her strongest premises were often relevant but undersufficient for the much more specific conclusions she drew from them. This is the core reason for the 8 out of 10 versus 4 out of 10 inferential strength score. Let's look at the evidence quality and source provenance. Wilson is scoring an 8 out of 10 here. Owens a 5 out of 10. Let's look at the Wilson information. Wilson's central evidentiary posture relied on the public prosecution/hearing record and alleged admissions. The source report credits him for asking whether private source claims could be independently verified, but he is not exempt from the same standard. His displayed September 9th security message remained a hold because the report lacked originating device metadata, sender authentication, or an independent custodian. Owens, a 5 out of 10. Owens brought genuine leads and anomalies into the discussion, including family sources, French source allegations, scene handling questions, and record discrepancies. The academic problem was source weight inflation. Prior source accuracy was treated as broader validation, while extraordinary claims were sometimes carried by private or anonymous sources without public records sufficient to authenticate the causal conclusion. Source laundering test. A participant saying, quote, "My source told me," proves that the participant reports a source claim. It does not establish that the source is correct. Academic debate requires independent corroboration in proportion to the extraordinary body and specificity of the conclusion. Rebuttal, responsiveness, and cross-examination. Wilson gets an 8 out of 10, Owens a 6.5 out of 10. Wilson generally engaged the central inferential question rather than only changing the subject. He answered why footwear could matter cumulatively, challenged the DNA timing inference, distinguished hearsay scope from evidentiary weight, defended procedural permission for the defense to present evidence, and asked Owens to state what would change her mind. His best response was a concession. Quote, "I actually don't have an explanation for that, Candace," end quote, on DNA degradation, which preserved credibility rather than manufacturing expertise. Owens, 6.5 out of 10. Owens was an active and sometimes effective cross-examiner. She exposed Wilson's uncertainty on DNA degradation, pressed the inclusive ballistics point, challenged discovery/phone access issues, and forced attention to rapid scene changes and evidence provenance. Her responsiveness score is therefore materially higher than her inferential strength score. The penalty comes when rebuttal of the prosecution case became a substitute or proving her affirmative alternative, and when critic motives or institutional coordination were invoked instead of answering the strongest counter-argument. Let's look at epistemic calibration, corrections, and falsifiability. We got behavior, audited example, and academic assessment. Wilson, uncertainty concession. Quote, "I actually don't have an explanation for that, Candace." Academic assessment, strong. Explicit uncertainty is preferable to post hoc technical speculation. Wilson, legal stage caveat. State has not yet proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Quote, overwhelming framed as personal conviction. Strong calibration, though some later rhetoric overstates. Owens, live correction. Quote, "I've corrected that mistake after the twigs on rifle extrapolation." Strong reliability, positive behavior. Correction must be credited, and we have credited the correction here. Owens, certainty inflation. Definitively not a 30-06 is her quote. France/Israel involvement, quote, "with full confidence." Weak calibration because confidence exceeds the audited support. Owens, falsifiability answer. Patrick Bet-David asks what evidence would change her mind. Her, quote, "slam dunk threshold is treated as personal, not a legal error." This is mixed. She gives a threshold, but it is unusually demanding and difficult for a preliminary public record to satisfy. Wilson, false precision. Quote, 90% of Owens's case is intuition. That was the quote. This is weak. Unsupported numerical precision lowers calibration. People shouldn't use these false numerical precisions when they're evaluating things in a debate. 90% of what you said is all BS. You know, the numerical value is just essentially made up, right? That's not a good epistemic posture. Net result, Wilson scores 8.5 on calibration and 8.0 on correction/falsifiability. Owens scores 4.0 on calibration because categorical confidence repeatedly outran the public record, but a stronger 6.5 on correction/falsifiability because she made a meaningful live correction and did answer the falsifiability prompt. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the reading of this debate-related data. Please smash that like button. It helps bring more people to the stream. And if you are an X user, please share my X post inviting people to come and join us. Number 8, legal and forensic conceptual precision. Technical debate performance depends not only on whether a conclusion is intuitively persuasive, but on whether the relevant categories are used correctly. The source report identifies several high-impact category and legal stage errors that directly affect academic debate quality. So we have issue, speaker/claim, forensic source verdict, and debate significance. First, we have DNA versus fingerprints. Owens, quote, 5 sets of fingerprints. This was a grave error. Owens, 5 sets of fingerprints. This is false. Testimony concerned mixed DNA, not 5 fingerprint sets. This is a major category error. This was probably the biggest major factual error in the debate. DNA degradation leading to timing conclusions. Owens says stronger profiles may have been more recent users. This is unsupported. Analysts did not date deposition or infer activity. This is an invalid warrant from degradation to recency. Entire hearing equals hearsay. Owens made this claim, and that is false. The entire hearing did not equal hearsay. Live testimony, physical evidence, surveillance, and forensics were also present. This was an overbroad legal characterization. Use immunity is equal to license to lie. Owens. That's false as stated. Immunity does not immunize perjury. One more time, immunity does not immunize perjury. Major legal misconception. Defense cannot present evidence at the preliminary hearing this was in reference to. Owens. This is false. Categorically under Utah Rule 7b. Again, false categorically under Utah Rule 7b. This is another major procedural error and misunderstanding. Quote, full discovery by Patrick Bet David. He made it into this legal and forensic conceptual precision. Full discovery, Patrick Bet David. Qualified, displayed filing was narrower and discovery continues. This is a moderator compression, however. Aggravated murder versus murder. Owens, this is qualified, statutory distinction real, quote, murder charge is still ordinary shorthand. In Utah law itself, legal analysts, legal practitioners, judges, they will talk about this case as a murder charge case, even though aggravated murder is the precise claim. Valid precision point, but overstated. Because when Andrew said, I think he's being charged with murder, Owen said, no. That's wrong to say no to that. It is generally acceptable by legal standards of conduct and communication in Utah to refer to this as Robinson being charged with murder, but more precisely, aggravated murder. They do hold separate charges. It's a valid precision point, but it's overstated. Parent behavior / profit motive. This one's for Wilson. This is just unsupported. Non-technical overreach, poor evidentiary inference. We will see the actual claims in total in reference here. But this is when he was saying, well, if parents were in X situation, they wouldn't want to behave like this. That's just an unsupported, non-technical overreach. He didn't provide any evidentiary weight to that inference. Number 9, logic and reasoning pattern audit under academic standards. So let's look at logic and reasoning pattern. Make sure I didn't forget anything. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with me this Saturday afternoon. I'm coming to you live from Oaxaca, Mexico. Oaxaca, Mexico. Logic and reasoning pattern audit under academic standards. The source reports logic audit maps cleanly onto academic augmentation norms. Owens's main weaknesses were possibility to evidence escalation, false equivalence, argument from incredulity, anomaly stacking, appeals to anonymous authority, arguments from silence, confidence shifts, and hidden motive attribution. Wilson's main weaknesses were expected behavior reasoning, unsupported motive attribution, broad political overgeneralization, false precision, and ad hominem / poisoning the well rhetoric. So let's look at it. We see figure 4 here. This is the conspiratorial reasoning structure from the forensic source report. So we see anomaly accumulation here. Candace Owens is scoring at a total 4. This is scored out of 4, this chart. Absence as evidence. She is scoring an overall 4 out of 4. Hidden motive attribution. She's scoring an overall 4 out of 4. This is referring to, by the way, just to be clear, to conspiratorial reasoning structure. Anonymous source insulation, a perfect 4 out of 4 for Candace Owens. Possibility to probability escalation, a perfect 4 out of 4 for Owens. Narrative elasticity for Owens, a 3 out of 4. Self-sealing, disconfirmation handling, a 3 out of 4. And then certainty beyond public evidence was given a full 4 out of 4. Academic interpretation of this graph or chart. Owens is sitting at a 30 out of 32 for conspiratorial reasoning structure. Owens' 30 out of 32 source score does not mean, quote, conspiracy thinking is always wrong. It means her debate case repeatedly used hidden coordination as an explanatory endpoint before the causal chain was independently established. Wilson's 9 out of 32, he's represented in the blue color in the chart here. Wilson's 9 out of 32 reflects substantially less of that structure, although his motive claims and broad political attribution still create avoidable inferential defects. Let's look at rhetoric, fallacies, and conduct. Academic debate permits forceful rhetoric, but personal attacks reduce quality when they replace, distort, or poison evaluation of the argument. The source report keeps rhetoric separate from misinformation, which is the correct methodological choice. Wilson, this is going to be his lowest score of this performance. And this is where, when I talk about Andrew Wilson, he needs to just simply become a better man. A better man will not say things like, I just think all women are retarded. Even if you think that it's funny, I would say in some cases, like in a Louis C.K. stand-up case or something like that, that statement can be funny. But that doesn't mean that this was an appropriate setting to dig your heels in and say something like that. That shows a lack of moral character from me, Travis Penguin, from a moral well-beingist standpoint. Lack of moral character. Because of the effect it has on his debate opponent, the potential effect it has on his debate opponent, to millions of people who will come across these statements and that will watch this. This has the potentiality of causing negative detriments by the standard of their well-being, their physical, mental, and social health. It's not to say that we can't joke around or can't express things understanding that we are going to offend people regardless of what we say in the war of ideas. But this was an egregious violation, in my opinion. So Wilson is sitting at a 4 out of 10 conduct. Wilson's major conduct failure is severe. The source report identifies, quote, so I think all women are retarded. And then he kind of laughed weirdly and in a way that didn't seem to understand any level of conscientiousness with regards to what he just said, where he was in the world at that moment. The source report identifies, quote, so I think all women are retarded as the most serious personal rhetoric failure in the transcript, alongside insults, broad political caricature, and unsupported profiteering motive claims. The remark does not erase his evidentiary advantage, but it sharply lowers academic professionalism and weakens ethos. So if you want to look more claim by claim with regards to everything that's being referenced here, you'll want to look at the full analysis report that on the website comes first in the download links before this debate specific assessment. But both of those documents are there. Let's look at Owens. But yeah, this is just my... Andrew's got to become a better man. A better man would not say stuff like this. So man up, become a better man. Grow out of this kind of infantile behavior. You call yourself a Christian, there is a clear line in Christianity that you're supposed to be adhering to. You're supposed to be following the examples of Jesus. So do that more. Be more rational to those purposes, because right now with crap like this, you look irrational to those purposes. You look like an irrational, infantile man when you behave in this way. Owens, 5.5 out of 10 conduct. Owens, not very good either. Owens also repeatedly used ridicule, gaslighting accusations, quote, knows nothing framing, and Turning Point USA / influencer insinuations. Prior Turning Point USA coaching was a legitimate disclosure issue, asserting that Turning Point USA was, quote, sending Wilson as its, quote, horse was unsupported. This is classic poisoning the well risk. A true relationship fact does not establish direction or the present argument. It sounds like my near 2-year-old boy is screaming bloody murder in the background, but I promise you he's having a good time. Let's look at figure 5, which is persuasive technique intensity in the source report. So we're looking at factual distortion. Candace Owens, for factual distortion, is sitting at a 3 out of 4. Andrew Wilson, a 1 out of 4. Certainty inflation, a perfect 4 out of 4 score for Candace Owens, a 2 out of 4 for Andrew Wilson. Selective omission. Candace Owens is sitting at a 3 out of 4. Andrew Wilson, a 2 out of 4. Emotional / loading. They're both sitting at a 3 out of 4. Hidden control structure, of course, Candace Owens is sitting at a 4 out of 4. Andrew Wilson, a 1 out of 4. Collective essentialization, they're both sitting at a 2 out of 4. Opponent caricature / false dichotomy, they're both sitting at a 3 out of 4. Effective repetition / performance, Candace Owens is sitting at a 3 out of 4, and Wilson a 2 out of 4. Let's look at the fact check ledger as supporting context, not a debate truth rate. The Perfected Forensic Source report contains a 94-unit curated material claim registry. The denominator was intentionally enriched for disputed, consequential, and fact-checkable claims. So the counts must not be converted into speaker-wide, quote, accuracy percentages. This academic debate report uses the ledger to identify recurrent strengths and weaknesses, not to compute a truth rate. So figure 3, we have curated material claim units on the left side. On the bottom, we have false, unsupported, qualified, supported, hold, and not rateable. Andrew Wilson is represented by the blue color, Candace Owens by the orange, Patrick Beck-David by the gray, but we don't need to look at that. So Candace Owens was the only one that made outright false claims in the debate, based on the current available evidence we have. Everything in Pangburn analysis is always open to update. All of these documents are all living documents. If you ever identify something that's incorrect that you can demonstrate, email me, travis@pang-burn.com, email us generally at info@pang-burn.com, send me a Discord DM, whatever. By the way, if you're not a Pangburn Discord member yet, please join us on Discord. All right. So you see false being represented here. Candace Owens is by herself in the false column. I believe it was 7. Yep. Based on the chart down here, Candace Owens made 7 blatantly false claims and 23 unsupported claims. That puts her at, between false and unsupported, 30 non-factual claims throughout the debate, 30 in total, compared to Andrew Wilson's 4 unsupported, a total of 4 unsupported. 30 Sorry, 4 in total non-factual. So it was 30 non-factual claims by Candace Owens and 4 non-factual claims by Andrew Wilson. And then we have others that are qualified. Qualified means that there's a factual kernel in the claim being made, but the way it's being presented, some of the extrapolations from that claim that are kind of included in the claim phrase are going to score it qualified. If those things were cleared up, which it's important for us to learn how to be precise to the facts, then those would be moved over to the supported column, but they're not clear as demonstrated by the debate data. So when it comes to the qualified section, Andrew Wilson had 9 qualified claims that had some distortion in them. Candace Owens had 18 qualified claims that consisted of some distortion. And we get to supported. These are the columns here. Supported. That's where we want to see the overwhelming representation in the supported column with regards to the facts. Unfortunately, that's not what we see. Andrew Wilson did quite well. He can clean up these simply qualified claims, get some more supported here. He had a few unsupported claims at 4, but when it comes to the facts, Andrew Wilson actually performed quite well in general compared to other debate analyses like this. Candace Owens did not. Candace Owens has an awful score. 30 non-factual claims is just terrible. It's the only way to describe it. And it has to do with underlying logical errors she makes. The lack of corresponding consistency to the objects in reality and the claims you are making about those objects in reality. If you look at the initial analysis, that outlines all of these specific epistemic issues that Candace Owens is suffering from that leads to these kinds of results. Hold just means further clarification is needed with regards to, I believe it's 1 claim, and I'll clear that up when we eventually release the version 2 of this report. Not rateable are simply normative claims, matters of personal subjective opinion. So there you have it right there. Andrew Wilson, out of 26 rateable units, 4 unsupported, 9 qualified, 7 supported, 1 held, and 5 not rateable. Candace Owens, 63 units. Again, everyone must understand that Candace Owens had the difficult epistemic task here because she's trying to sell a conspiracy theory without any causal lines being drawn to that theory from the the anomaly stacking she's doing, this conspiratorial line drawing. She hasn't drawn the most important line, which is the causal line to the overarching theory. So she had the difficult task. Andrew Wilson had a simple task, a philosophy 101 task, a basic understanding of basic logical principles task in this debate. And he carried out that task as to be expected with regards to someone who understands the basics of logic. So this shouldn't be taken to mean that like Andrew Wilson put on an amazing performance. If Andrew Wilson wouldn't have been able to do this basic logic challenging, then it would have just shown that he has no chops whatsoever. But he shows that he has some chops in what I would still call a low resolution, from an academic perspective, a low resolution debate like this one was. Low resolution because the level of expertise on display in this debate were elementary. They weren't, there was nothing extraordinary or anything of serious academic consideration in this debate. So why did I do these academic level reports, these high resolution epistemic and ethical reports, because I knew this was going to be such a widespread, highly viewed debate. I understood the pop culture element of it. And I thought that it was an important teaching opportunity to create documents like this, to share them with the world, to show everyone where their negativity bias and their positivity bias are doing their own fact finding for them. When people come out of this thinking like, yeah, Candace Owens was based on the facts, bro. That's not what the data shows. Not at all. On the contrary, it shows that she has very little connective resolution to the facts related to the things that were brought up in this debate. Very low resolution relationship with the facts. So I will be sharing these reports, especially with people who I think should know better, who I think actually have the educational prowess to be able to look at the information of this debate and be able to overcome, let's say, their negativity bias towards someone like Andrew Wilson, who's kind of like, seems to be like the villain of the debate world. And I understand why, because he's not a good man. He can become a good man, but he's not a good man. I keep harping on this, but I guess when Andrew Wilson gets his stuff together and wants to sit down with Uncle Trav and have a conversation about good ethical posture in this world, we can have that conversation. But there are clear, direct lines that he can take to be a more rational man to his own Christian professed purposes. But he needs to learn to be open to update ethically. And that's going to be really difficult for him. Because he strikes me as in general, a heel digger with regards to some ethical issues and some ways that he feels about people like me. Because I would typically be put on the center left, automatically that means he has hate for me, which again is like, how do you square that with Christian morality and Jesus? Like, and I'm not a Christian, but he claims to be. So he's currently living irrationally as an irrational man to his own Christian purposes. So what the ledger does show here, within the curated high salience material selected for audit, Owens had more high impact legal forensic errors and many more unsupported extraordinary claims, while Wilson's main defects were overstatements, motive/behavioral inferences, unsupported numerical precision, and rhetoric. That pattern is consistent with, but not identical to, the academic scoring above. Okay, let's look at the key exchange by exchange academic adjudication. How are y'all doing? You hanging in there? This eventually will be edited down into a bit shorter video that people will be able to speed up, watch at 1.5 speed or whatever people like to do. Good sound epistemology is not a race. So I would suggest not speeding it up. Watch it at 1 speed, regular speed. So in this chart, we have exchange, academic edge, and reason. Shooter certainty/burden. Academic edge goes to Wilson. Owens is, quote, 0% about how likely she thinks it is that Robinson was the shooter. She doesn't say, I think it's more, I just think it's more likely, which could mean like 40%, that there's some kind of conspiracy involved. She says 0%. That is an infallible certainty posture that is consistent with cognitive rigidity, not cognitive flexibility. Often one of the big underlying cognitive problems that's going on with conspiratorial line drawing, you get so sentimentally convinced by this conspiracy theory you've created that you become cognitively rigid about that, which means the chances of you being open to any kind of possibility of update can become or feel like 0%. That's like an absolutist, infallibilist posturing. So Owens' 0% is personal and not itself misinformation, but her affirmative alternative remained undersupported. Wilson better matched the available cumulative evidence to his claim. Specific rifle ballistics. Academic edge goes to Owens on the limitation, Wilson on overall inference. So Owens correctly emphasized the inconclusive microscopic rifle to projectile comparison. Her definitively not a 30-06 overclaim lost the stronger point. DNA / degradation. This is the academic edge is a split / slight Wilson. Owens correctly exposed mixture complexity. Wilson correctly resisted turning degradation into a timeline and openly conceded that he could not explain. Hearsay / preliminary hearing. The edge goes to Wilson. Owens's categorical, quote, entire hearsay claim and equivalence argument failed. Wilson correctly noted not all evidence was hearsay. That goes to Wilson. Use immunity. Wilson gets the edge. Owens's license to lie formulation was a major legal error. If you're granted immunity, it doesn't mean you are granted a license to lie, right? This is something Candace Owens should understand. You're still exposed to perjury, of course. Defense powers at preliminary hearing. Edge goes to Wilson. Rule 7b directly defeats Owens's categorical, quote, not allowed claim, though defense strategy remains discretionary. Owens made this categorical claim that the defense was not allowed to present their evidence or talk to witnesses or etc. during the preliminary stages. That's just false, demonstrably false by Utah's Rule 7b. Scene anomaly / paving / body cam / backpack. Owens has an edge on questions, no winner on hidden mechanism. Owens raised legitimate documentary weaknesses. Academic credit stops where anomaly is prompted to planting / cover up without bridge evidence. I'm going to make one note of something I want to upgrade for when we do report number version 2 for this particular. Let me go to I want this section. For the reason to contain more correct information. So for version 2, we'll make an upgrade there. Let's see. France / Israel movement Wilson gets the edge. Owens's confidence far exceeded public operational evidence. Wilson's bridge evidence objection is academically decisive. So just because Owens is claiming a reliable whistleblower, or whatever you want to call them, person told her about things related to France and Israel, her confidence is still far exceeding and just basically seems to be based on her reasoning, trusting that person's word. Now that's what seems to be the case. Maybe at some point she will provide who these people are that are telling her that France and Israel are involved. Maybe she'll provide that at some point. But as it stands right now, it seems to me that she is putting way too much confidence on these, private contacts that haven't been made public that are telling her things. Exploding microphone. The edge goes to Wilson. The theory was framed as viable without comparable positive forensic evidence. There's no forensic evidence being offered. Hypothesis generation is not burden discharge. Important lesson from this entire debate. Hypothesis generation is not burden discharge. Turning point USA relationship. Owens on a particular disclosure gets the edge. Wilson on direction claim. Prior coaching relationship is real and relevant. That is, Turning Point USA has hired Andrew Wilson in the past to come in and do some debate coaching. Payment/direction for this debate was not established. So it has not been publicly established that the $300,000 payment or any kind of direction from Turning Point USA was involved. So if you're believing that as a positive belief, I'm going to ask you, what good reason, what justifications do you have to believe that? Not that you think it's a reasonable hypothesis to investigate. Sure, reasonable hypothesis to investigate. But if you believe it, if you positively believe that proposition, I don't think it's going to be grounded in any kind of evidentiary justification at this point. That public information just doesn't seem to be available. Steakhouse stop. Wilson narrowly gets the edge. There was a genuine lead, so, quote, no evidence was too absolute. Yeah, Andrew Wilson said there was no evidence. This is a problem in debates in general. This is where you can tell low resolution from mid-tier to high resolution in debates. Low resolution debates, you'll hear people say, there's absolutely no evidence for this and no evidence for that. When there's things like testimonial evidence and circumstantial evidence, it's a very low resolution, non-academic way of talking about evidence. Testimony itself is evidence, but testimonial evidence of Alex Jones testifying that he saw a secret document one time that he couldn't get his hands on, that China has built an entire civilization on the backside of the moon. That testimony, that's still evidence. That's still, from an academic perspective, that is still evidence. Is it good evidence? No, that's probably the worst kind of evidence one could muster to demonstrate that China is operating a new civilization on the backside of the moon. Still evidence, though. So don't be absolute about dismissing things that are actually evidence and saying there's no evidence or there's absolutely no evidence. That's just low resolution stuff. Payment/direction for this debate was not established. Oh, sorry, we're on to the next one. So there was a genuine lead, so, quote, no evidence was too absolute, but the stop was not publicly confirmed as Robinson's. So whether or not Robinson's card was used at the steakhouse stop doesn't mean it was, in fact, him. If there is a receipt with his card, So, so many things have to be demonstrated with regards to that particular thing in order for it to be credible. Screwdriver planting / body cam failure. Owens gets the edge on the anomaly itself, Wilson on mechanism burden. So body cam failure merits scrutiny. That merits a really important question. That should be investigated. Why did the body cam fail? What can we learn about that? What can we know? That's a good posture from Owens to think that that's important to investigate. But there is a however here. Affirmative planting evidence was not presented. So just because there's a body cam failure, body cams fail all the time, right? Just because there was a body cam failure in this instance, it does not mean that is any kind of direct or positive evidence of planting evidence that the screwdriver was in fact planted. It's more likely now because the body cam failed. No, that's not the way logic works. That's just not. How's everyone doing? You hanging in there? Make sure you smash that like button. Smash, smash, smash. Thank you for being with me here on Saturday evening here in Oaxaca, Mexico. I wish I could share this beautiful weather with you guys today. Take a look. I have 5 banana trees over there, 3 papaya plants, lime trees, lemon trees, Nispero trees. I just love it here. Anyways, let's move on because this is serious business. Let's look at the debater profiles under academic standards. Andrew Wilson, strong evidentiary debater, weakened by his rhetoric. Best skill, keeping the main dispute tied to a cumulative evidence model rather than a single exhibit. Best epistemic behavior, explicit uncertainty concession on DNA degradation. Best argumentative move, demanding a causal bridge from anomaly to specific hidden action mechanism. Best legal point, rejecting the categorical claim that the defense could not present evidence at preliminary hearing. Primary technical weakness, some prosecution allegations treated too much like settled facts, over absolute, quote, no evidence language. Primary logic weakness, parent behavior and profiteering motive inferences, unsupported, quote, 90% precision claim about Candace Owens. Primary conduct weakness, personal insults and severe sex-based essentialization material below academic discussion standards. If Andrew Wilson wants to transcend this current bad boy character who throws monkey feces or has a tendency to throw monkey feces out of his own butt at other debate opponents and treats people that way on social media and whatnot. If he ever wants to transcend that character and be taken more seriously, like from an academic perspective, from a scholarly perspective, from a science perspective, from a political science perspective, he needs to cut that out. He needs to become a better man. Candace Owens, strong anomaly detector, weak affirmative burden discharge. Her best skill, identifying real evidentiary limitations, like the fact, for example, just off the top of my head, the ballistics issue, that the bullet can't conclusively, that was taken from Charlie Kirk, cannot conclusively be matched to the gun that was recovered. That, of course, doesn't mean that it didn't come from that gun, but the fact that it can't conclusively be matched to that gun, that's a strong point for the defense that they're going to run out if there actually is a trial. I'm not sure this is going to go to trial, by the way. I think it's probably going to be a plea deal. I think the plea deal is going to include the death penalty being taken off the table, and Robinson will plead guilty to first-degree murder of Charlie Kirk. That's my prediction at this point. So her best skill, identifying real evidentiary limitations, procedural anomalies, and source provenance questions that deserve explanation. Best forensic point, resisting a conclusive specific rifle ballistics claim when the comparison was inconclusive. Best reliability, positive behavior, live correction of the twigs on rifle extrapolation. That was great, seeing that live correction of the twigs on rifle extrapolation. Primary technical weakness, DNA/fingerprint conflation, use immunity misconception, hearsay overstatement, and defense powers error. Primary logic weaknesses or weakness, anomaly stacking and possibility to probability escalation without mechanism level bridge evidence. Primary source weakness, extraordinary hidden actor claims carried by anonymous/private source without public corroboration proportional to the conclusion. Primary calibration weakness, categorical or full confidence language despite unresolved evidence. We do have a Patrick Bet-David moderator analysis. I'm not going to read through it, but I think it was fine. In low resolution debate spaces, you essentially do need a moderator. At Pangburn, we try to promote high resolution discussions, try to move people towards a debate space that requires you as the expert to be able to bring an ethical posture that is conducive to a fruitful conversation or debate. But in the low resolution spaces, you basically always need a debate moderator. So there's his scoring. So we already started off by seeing the final weighted score reconciliation. You can see the dimensions all on the farthest left column, and then we have the weight. What dimensional weighting category is given what percentage in the final score. We see Andrew Wilson with an overall score of 7.9, which is a competent score. We see Candace Owens with an overall score of 5 out of 10, which is not good at all. Competency is at a 7 out of 10, based on my metrics, based on the Pangburn analysis standards. So she is far below that. In fact, she is almost receiving a failing grade overall. So the final academic verdict, Andrew Wilson, 7.9 out of 10, strong. Candace Owens, 5 out of 10, mixed and limited. Wilson wins the debate on evidence-centered academic standards by a clear margin. The margin is driven by inferential sufficiency, burden management, source discipline, and calibration, not by rhetorical polish. Owens receives meaningful credit for legitimate anomaly detection, cross-examination, forensic skepticism, and live correction, but those strengths do not supply the missing warrants for her most consequential affirmative hidden action claims. Let's look at what could change the academic verdict. Someone said, I don't know this guy, but he's biased. Can you point out a single bias? Can you demonstrate one single bias in this process? And if you point to a bias like, well, he's biased towards he's using academic generalized standards of debate as a metric of measurement, yes, that would be a correct bias to point out. If you're saying the Penguin virtues and maxims, when Travis says things about, Andrew Wilson needs to become a better man, that's just bias based on his own ethical standards. That would be a correct bias to point out. But if you're talking about internal bias within the system, demonstrate it. Let's see if you can. What could change the academic verdict? Because the underlying criminal case is pending and the source report is explicitly time-bound, the academic evaluation should change if the evidentiary base changes. What does that mean? It means all Pangburn analysis documents are living documents, and new versions will be put out if new evidence comes to light, if corrections need to be made. Of course, this is what we do. New authenticated evidence could materially upgrade or downgrade arguments that were rationally weak or strong at the August 14th cutoff. Now, just because new evidence shows up at a later date doesn't mean that the person at this time was reasonably justified to believe that that evidence existed. If they weren't able to demonstrate why they believed that, it's not going to change their score, but it will change the record with regards to what new evidence has come to light since this debate scoring. Authenticated device level evidence showing message fabrication or alternate authorship. So like, for example, if Andrew Wilson just falsely made up that message from where Charlie Kirk was represented in an email response, then that would affect the scoring of this particular debate. Primary records confirming or disproving the Panguitch steakhouse stop. Isn't that funny? It's called Panguitch Steakhouse Shop. Like Pangburn, but Panguitch. Verified operational evidence linking a foreign actor to planning, communication, financing, access, or execution. Explosive residue, device pathology, or authenticated microphone fragment analysis supporting an explosive mechanism. Definitive alternate shooter video or source records establishing an actual frame-up mechanism. Trial testimony, materially changing the provenance or interpretation of rifle, DNA, surveillance, or admissions evidence. An academic debate score is therefore conditional on the evidence available at the time. A future speaker who updates after stronger evidence should be rewarded rather than mechanically bound to a prior score. That is true. If Candace Owens puts out a video tomorrow correcting a lot of these factual errors, and there are a ton of them, she should be rewarded for doing that. That is the righteous epistemic posture. Limitations, reproducibility, and triple check audit. This is just outlining how we overcome particular common errors that can happen in reports like this, like source control audit, count reconciliation, scoring arithmetic, denominator safeguard, scope safeguard, name version safeguard, visual QA. Audit conclusion: the academic verdict is robust to reasonable rewriting. Wilson's lead is concentrated on the highest weight dimensions, evidence quality, inferential strength, and burden management. Owens' stronger showing in cross-examination and her meaningful correction behavior narrow the gap, but do not overcome the central sufficiency problem identified throughout the forensic source record. So, the controlling source artifact, we're looking at framework and source references. The controlling source artifact is, of course, the current full pang-burn analysis that exists on our website, pang-burn.com/analysis. I'm going to give you guys that link if you want to click on it. Academic argumentation framework. So these are the academic sources. Tolman, Stephen E., The Uses of Argument, 2nd edition, Cambridge University Press, 2003. Framework for Claim, Data, Warrant, Backing, Qualifier, and Rebuttal. And then you have other academic argumentation framework resources here. Appendix A score anchor definitions. Appendix A score anchor definitions. Oh, yes. Let's double check Appendix A. Figure 2. Let's see here. Thanks for being with me, everyone. Make sure you smash that like button, share the stream if you found this valuable. I will be releasing this into a video for the main video stream. Very soon, tomorrow, in fact. Oh, sorry. I'm just being silly. This is Appendix A. My bad. Which is the score anchor definitions. So, a 9 to 10 score means consistently meets burden with high quality evidence, explicit warrant, strong rebuttal, precise qualification, and minimal material fallacy. And then we go all the way down to below 4 would mean seriously deficient. Central argument repeatedly fails relevance/sufficiency/burden or is dominated by unsupported assertion. Appendix B is high leverage source report units used in academic scoring. So these are the source report units. They have a corresponding source unit number and speaker allocation. Then it gives you the finding and academic role. And that's that, folks, for this document. So one thing I wanted to do with you guys is to pull up the full analysis document. Just want to make sure this is zoomed in. This is where we're currently at for the full analysis document. Some of you have already seen this. But this is where you're going to get more detail, specific detail relating to specific epistemic failures by each debater, the rate of those failures, etc. I'm on the wrong one. I want to be on this one. So we're currently at 94 audited units. 7 of them were found to be contradicted. legal stage errors, and all 7 pure falsehoods were committed by Candace Owens. There's a mix dominated by Candace Owens in the unsupported column, which we will see in the graph. But I read through this yesterday for everyone, but you're going to get far more detail in this document, specific detail, but it's a good document to read first and then go to the debate performance specific document that's weighing the performances using the metric of rigorous academic standards of debate. You get your verdict taxonomy. It tells you what false, unsupported, qualified, supported means. Gives you the triple check protocol. Gives you a table of highest impact misinformation and material defects. So, for example, this ID number claim 14 by Candace Owens at around 45 minutes and 13 seconds in the video was false. And that claim was the fact that there were 5 sets of prints, 5 plus actually. The correction here is the testimony concerned mixed DNA, not 5 fingerprint sets. The combined trigger/trigger guard sample had at least 4 contributors. Testimony allowed that the true number could be higher. That's what was said. So there's the false claim correction there. I just want to pull this back up. There we go. So yeah, these particular claims are rated as the highest impact misinformation and material defects. Then we get core evidence map, what the debate can and cannot establish with regards to surveillance, rifle ammunition, DNA, text, Discord note, twig statements, etc. The central burden distinction here, logic, inference, and epistemic quality audit. So this is going through logic, inference, and epistemic quality. The speaker is on the left. Candace Owens is represented for the most part. We have some errors by Andrew Wilson, one by Patrick Bet-David. So for example, the first one, possibility is treated as evidence from Candace Owens, treats merely possible mechanisms, planted gun, account login, explosive mic, alternate actor, as affirmative weight for a specific patsy theory. So instead of just saying, those things are simply just possible things. Possibility ought not weigh into our epistemic standards. Just because something can be shown to be logically possible doesn't really mean anything, because we can't, by a classical logic standpoint, we can't demonstrate something to be impossible, like truly incontrovertibly impossible. We can't do that. It's a logical issue as old as time. That's why possibility ought not weigh into our epistemic standard, because seemingly everything is possible. So we should rely on plausibility, things that have a particular likelihood of being the case. So just because it's possible that someone planted a gun, that doesn't mean it's likely that someone planted the gun. That is the difference between possibility and plausibility. So if you're trying to build a high resolution epistemic standard, it should not make reference to possibility or trying to reach absolute certainty. That's low resolution stuff that you overcome when you become more educated and start to form a high resolution academic epistemic standard. And just while we're on the topic, when it comes to justified true belief, JTB, when it comes to truth in particular, we should care to make correspondence criteria of truth primary. That just in the most basic example I can give you, correspondence criteria of truth means that as a fundamental truth principle, the proposition is made. Let's say the proposition is the Statue of Liberty exists in New York City. That's the proposition that we are faced with. Correspondence criteria of truth says that claim is true if, in fact, the object in question, which is the Statue of Liberty, can be verified to actually exist, the object exist in New York City, the objective place in reference. So it deals with objectivity. That's what correspondence criteria of truth is. And that fundamental principle gives rise to things like empiricism and, like we all try to use, science as a way of knowing.